This Honourable House resumes the sitting. Please be seated.
And to respond to the budget as presented by the Premier and Minister of Finance. Good morning once again, Mr. President. It is indeed an honor and privilege for me to rise in this honorable House this morning to lend support to the bill and to respond to the budget as presented by the Premier and Minister of Finance under the theme, Rebuilding Our Economy, a people-centered approach to economic recovery. Mr. President, all nations have been affected by the COVID-19 global pandemic. The absence of global leadership and the coordinated response is taking its toll everywhere, but particularly on the most vulnerable nations. This crisis has made us all aware of how interconnected our systems are and how much economic recovery in one nation depends on the economic recovery elsewhere. Nowhere is that more true than in the Caribbean, where economies are very open and highly vulnerable to diseases, natural hazards, and other economic stresses, and are also highly dependent on tourism revenues, which have been totally wiped out. Mr. President, I concede with the presenter of the budget that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on our economy. However, it is important to note that our economy was uncomfortably declining long before the COVID-19 global pandemic. I refer to the report of the Director of Audit for the period of December 31st, 2019, included in the bundle of documents which I received during yesterday's sitting. And, Mr. President, if I may pause for a minute to deal with some housekeeping matters, I believe, Mr. President, the time has now come for us to employ good governance principles. And you would note, Mr. President, yes, during yesterday's sitting, I was presented with the budget as well as the ancillary documents, including the estimates as well as the audit report, only during yesterday's sitting. Now, whilst I accept, Mr. President, that this perhaps is the norm and the culture and the tradition of this honorable House, I am of the firm view, Mr. President, that these budget proceedings are very important important proceedings to public administration, as well as integrity in public life. And so, Mr. President, if through you, I can appeal to the government side to ensure that they allow sufficient time for the opposition to become familiarized with the documents before them, particularly when we are discussing matters of such great importance, which includes the finance of this country. Mr. President, I wish to encourage the members opposite that we live in a democracy. We, as government officials, government ministers, as you would have it, representatives of the people, we owe the people transparency, Mr. President. We owe the people integrity, and we owe it to the people to always ensure that we act in accordance with good principles and that we promote good governance. And so, therefore, it is my respectful submission, Mr. President, that more time is really needed in order to exhaust, to fully analyze, and to fully appreciate the contents of the papers before this Honorable House, the contents of the bill, so that we can have meaningful and fruitful discussions. And so, Mr. President, I do hope that my appeal is duly noted by the members opposite. Now, Mr. President, if I may continue with my presentation, I refer to the report of the Director of Audit for the period of December 31st, 2019. At page 5, the Director reported At page 5, Mr. President, the Director reported that the public account for the year end December 31st, 2020 disclosed an overall deficit of $26.78 million. This is a significant increase from the $18.2 million deficit which resulted in 2018 and the $16.37 million deficit in 2017. In fact, Mr. President, the Director further reported that historical data shows several years of deficits result and only several years of deficit which result and only 2 years of surpluses result. The surpluses are shown in 2010 of 1.4 million and 2015, Mr. President, of 4.8 million that barely manage a total of over 5 million. The remaining 8-year period has grabbed a deficit of 116.37 million, with the highest being in 2019 of 26.78 million. Mr. President, the budget for 2019-2020 presents an even greater deficit. Mr. President, it is with this note in mind, I wish to you to advise the people of Nevis and St. Kitts that the country is in an economic disaster. Year after year, as per the Director of Audit report, we continue to see the NIA presenting budgets of reported deficits. My question to you, Mr. President, and to the members on the other side, for how much longer do we intend to continue to present budget of this nature? I am fearful, and surely you must be too, Mr. President, that one day, the bottom will fall out of the bucket. Now, Mr. President, Having barely had the opportunity to analyze and dissect the budget address presented by the Honorable Premier, I wish to Mr. President, somewhat applaud him in his efforts, because we do recognize that these are, in fact, dire and stringent economic times in this period of COVID-19. However, Mr. President, I do believe that greater efforts needs to be exhausted in terms of the government paying attention to strategic planning, and as well as having a more meaningful and deliberate strategic oversight. Now, Mr. President, I have observed the budget, and I must say that it appears to be somewhat of an empty budget. A budget given because we simply have to go through the exercise of presenting a budget, as this is the end of the fiscal year. Mr. President, having looked at the budget, I notice, and perhaps I wish to cautiously make a recommendation to the members opposite, that greater consideration should be given towards the NIA economic plans. And I wish to explain a bit further, Mr. President. Year after year, and we all know this, the budget is prepared by the Minister of the Permanent Secretary of Finance. He gives guidance to the Minister of Finance. And Mr. President, with no disrespect or ill will to the PS of Finance, he is my personal friend, I wish to say that perhaps the time has come for the government to seek assistance and consultation elsewhere from expert people who are versed and have expert knowledge in economics. Mr. President, you are quite aware that the PS in Finance is a trained accountant, and so his limitations when it comes to revenue foresight, strategic plans, really driving an economy may be somewhat limited. And in making this persuasive argument, Mr. President, I wish to make comparison to Honorable Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados. Mia, sorry. Thank you, Honorable Member. Now, Mia Mottley, when she got into government, she realized that she had some challenges within her own internal administration. And in order to employ good governance and in order to drive her economy, Mia Mottley engaged the services or put together a team of experts who would be able to assist her greatly in terms of steering the economic direction of Barbados. And so, Ms. Mottley employed the services of Dr. Clyde Muskol, PhD in economics and a former UWI lecturer in economics, Professor Anvanash Prasad, International Monetary Economics and former chairman of the Royal Bank of Canada of Barbados, Dr. Kelvin Greenedge, IMF Economics, and Honorable Marsha Caddell, Minister of Economics Affairs and Investment Development Economics, who previously worked with CDB and UNDP. Also included in that team was former Prime Minister Owen Arthur. You see, Mr. President, the people's business, the role, the function of really driving the economy, particularly in these dire times, is of importance to Prime Minister Mottley. And therefore, having realized her internal challenges, she had the foresight and the inclination to bring the expert on her team to give us some guidance. That is needed by the Nevis Island administration. The time has now come for us to outsource. We need to seek expert advice and guidance in terms of building an economy and putting strategic plans in place to generate revenue. For far too long, Mr. President, the NIA, at least for the past 8 years, has relied solely on a tax-based revenue-generated system. They have somewhat adopted the Napoleon approach, where they are taxing the people of Nevis, and by extension, this can be further extended to St. Kitts as well, to death. We have no new monies being interjected into the economy. And this is clearly visible in the budget for 2020. Mr. President, I searched the pages of the budget, seeking, Mr. President, to find somewhere some strategic outlook, some strategic plan, some strategic focus, some strategic initiative that would create new money, new revenue that would interject this into the Nevis economy. And I searched long and hard, but I was unsuccessful. And so what we have before us, Mr. President, is a budget that continues to rely on taxes, a budget that continues to rely on loans, existing loans, restructuring of overdrafts, and no real strategic initiatives, no hardcore, no substantial strategic initiatives to really generate revenue to create vast employment for the people of Nevis. And so, Mr. President, here we are, another year, going through the emotions, basically, of conducting this exercise with little or no economic foresight, economic excitement, economic encouragement for the people of Nevis. It is once again a budget of dull and gloom, because instead of resulting in a surplus, which perhaps we did not expect in COVID-19, but we have increased expenditure and little or no new revenue, decrease in revenue to be exact. And so, Mr. President, if I may refer to the report of the Director of Audit. The Director, in his analysis for the period of 2019, has concluded and cautiously warned that accumulated deficits on the current account for this period exceeded 159.8 million. And he also cautioned and stated it can be concluded that the Ministry of Finance needs to exert more control over the spending levels of the current account. So what the Director of Audit is basically saying, having looked at the fiscal policy and having assessed the economic activity of this government, the Director is cautious, and he is somewhat warning the government, telling them, listen, you have to decrease your spending because the revenue that is being generated, it is not sufficient to meet the NIA's expenses. Mr. President, I believe a word to the wise is sufficient. Now, when we look at the tourism sector, The Honorable Premier yesterday, in his address, reported that the tourism sector, and permit me a few minutes to just find the page. The tourism sector has been somewhat crippled by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we accept that. But if we are to be honest with ourselves, Mr. President, our economy was crippled, stagnant, some time prior to COVID-19. We take a look at the initiatives being employed by our sister islands. For example, we can just go next door to St. Kitts. St. Kitts, over the past 20 years, we would have seen the interjection or the introduction of the St. Kitts Marriotts in 2003. We would have seen the Park Hyatt in 2017, and soon the Hilton Koi in 2020. If we look at Bahamas, in terms of new hotels, the ability to attract new investments and build new hotels, the Bahamas would have built or introduced Rosewood Hotel in 2008, Grand Hyatt in 2017, and Four Seasons in 2017, and a banyan tree soon to come. Let us go across to the Cayman Islands. Cayman's had the Ritz-Carlton Hotel since 2004, Kimpton in 2016, and Mandarin Oriental, which they're soon to be announced. They also have the Westin Hotel since 1995 and a Marriott. We can go a little closer to home to Anguilla, Mr. President, where Anguilla had the Viceroy Hotel, later rebranded as Four Seasons in 2016, Belmont in 2017, and also Hilton Zemi Beach House, which also opened in 2016. We can even go as far as looking at Cuba. Mr. President, the point of this is simply to demonstrate that we have countries in the Caribbean who share the same geographical circumstances as us, the same economic circumstances, the same social circumstances. But these countries, Mr. President, they have made their way to bring new investment to their country over a period of 20 years, perhaps even 5 years, perhaps even within the 8 years since this government has been in operation. But Mr. President, if we were to contrast that with Nevis, what have we done? Nevis is still performing and operating on the economic pillars that were introduced by Dr. Simeon Daniel way back in the 1980s. So, Mr. President, we have not really made any efforts to bring any new investment to the people of Nevis. Mr. President, from where I stand, and perhaps from where you sit, I see the members on the opposite getting excited, Mr. President, so I must be doing a very good job. Nevertheless, I will continue. Mr. President, it appears that the honorable member has something to say, so I'll take my seat.
Please.
So, Mr. President, I can see honorable members on the opposite side getting excited, but nevertheless, the truth must be told, and the truth is the truth, and it is quite obvious. Mr. President, Nevis, more so than any other country in the Caribbean, is in a position where it can perhaps attract new investment to its shores. In fact, Nevis has not only a premier and a minister of finance, but much to our advantage, the Honorable Premier is also the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the federal parliament. And so, with all of this accolades and with all of this resources and access, how is it that the Honorable Premier and his administration is unable to follow in the footprint of his fellow colleagues and fellow leaders throughout the Caribbean to bring new investment, significant investment, to the shores of Nevis? Something must be utterly wrong with the equation, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, if I may, and I note that I am merely giving recommendations and suggestions to the other side, which I hope they will take heed. The time has perhaps come for us to make cautious decisions and deliberate decisions about the economic situation here in Nevis. With respect to our fiscal situation, we note from the budget that our expenditure grossly exceed the budgeted revenue yearly. Now, how can we continue to operate like this? It is poor fiscal management and lack of fiscal prudency. The time has now come for us to attract new investments to the shore of Nevis, and also COVID-19, if it has taught us nothing else, Mr. President, it has taught us that the time has come for us to significantly diversify our economy. And I wish to speak a bit about economic diversification, because I note it is mentioned here in the budget, but not in any meaningful way. So perhaps I can give the members opposite, some meaningful recommendations. Now, we are at the stage where we live in a digital revolutionary sphere. We must be able, in order to survive at the very least for the next 10 years, we must be in a position to take advantage of the digitalization of our economy. By that I mean, Mr. President, it goes beyond just having a new website for the investment promotional unit. Digitalization would see an introduction of financial technical platforms that meet the requirements of fintech. Digitalization is the ability, Mr. President, for us to click a button and to be able to drive our economy through faster and more efficient services. Now, in the World Bank Ease of Business Report 2019, Mr. President, I note that St. Kitts and Nevis ranked somewhere in the bottom of perhaps 163 on the index for the ease of doing business, particularly when it comes to the transferring of land. Mr. President, we have a dire situation here in St. Kitts and Nevis. particularly affecting Nevis. And for the life of me, and perhaps to the life of many Nevisians through you, we are yet to understand why is it that Nevis does not have its own land registrar. Mr. President, perhaps you are aware that we have an arrangement with the federal government where the land registrar for Nevis comes to Nevis from St. Kitts fortnightly, every fortnight, in order to sign off on land transfers documents. This has been somewhat of a nuisance to persons in Nevis, particularly stakeholders such as attorneys and the persons themselves, the buyers and the sellers of property. It must also be a nuance to the NIA because, Mr. President, the longer the NIA takes to process land transaction, it means that the tax in terms of the stamp duty is delayed. And so, if we are talking about initiatives to seriously drive the economy, initiatives to seriously have an overturn of revenue, a fast turnover, Mr. President, I am simply saying that we have to look at our own internal structures. The time is well and perhaps long overdue for Nevis to have its own land registrar. And I must say that a few years ago, under the Nevis Reformation Party-led government, we never had this problem because that government saw the initiative for Nevis to have its own land registrar. And we had that person in the name of Miss Yasmin Clark, who was able to function in somewhat of a dual capacity, but nevertheless, the benefit from that is that we saw a greater turnover of land transaction. We saw an increase or more timely and efficient method of being able to sign off on land transfers such as COT, mortgages, what have you. And so, one perhaps would agree with me, Mr. President, that we have somewhat taken a step backwards because now we have to wait and plunder and call the registry to find out when it is that the land register would be available. And Mr. President, I know they won't admit it, but I know they too feel it. Because sometimes, and I myself being an attorney, have witnessed clients get frustrated with the process to the extent that they abort the land transaction. And that, Mr. President, is a denial of an opportunity for the government themselves to be able to gain on revenue in terms of stamp duty. So it is something, Mr. President, for them to look at. Now, Mr. President, I wish to turn to now perhaps paragraph 37 of the budget that was presented yesterday under the heading of Rebuilding Our Economy. And Mr. President, once again, some efforts were initiated to rebuild the economy, but perhaps not at the scale that we, the people of Nevis, is desirous of. Mr. President, the honorable member stated in his presentation yesterday that the pandemic the onset of the pandemic has forced investors in real estate development to rethink their investment options. Real estate properties such as hotels and villas may no longer be seen as attractive investment at this time. And I take the point, Mr. President, whilst that may be true because we are presently experiencing a global pandemic, Mr. President, if truth be told, we have to start at this stage, make the necessary plans in order and have the foresight in order for us to have a greater economic footing post-COVID-19. It is not sufficient for us to sit back and say that investors are not going to invest and we cannot initiate any development in large projects in terms of real estate. We have to now set the foundation in place because I believe, Mr. President, in the near future, we are going to see an overturn and a full recovery from this COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, it is imperative for the government to aggressively put greater efforts in their endeavors to attract new investment when it comes to property development, real estate, particularly in the tourism industry, and to be able to attract new and greater hotels to Nevis. Now, Mr. President, I now turn to perhaps the second pillar of revenue generation for St. Kitts and Nevis, which is the CBI project. Now, Mr. President, I see here that the CBI project has generated, or is projected to generate, some 42, I believe it's 42 million. 1 minute, Mr. President. 45 million. And it is encouraging, Mr. President, and I wish to commend all stakeholders for that initiative. However, Mr. President, because of the fragile nature of the CBI platform, Mr. President, because of its vulnerability, and because the program can be significantly impacted by international factors such as blacklisting from the EU, as well as the US. And we also note, Mr. President, that the EU is presently on a drive to reevaluate and reassess the impact of the CBI program in these states on its economy, to the extent that Cyprus, Mr. President, recently decided to terminate its CBI program. Mr. President, we have to, as a government, take into consideration the fact that this particular industry is very vulnerable, and as such, even though whilst it is producing revenue at 45 million today, what may happen next year, or perhaps 2 or 3 years down the line, Mr. President? We have to take that into consideration. And so the point that I wish to make, Mr. President, it is not sufficient for us to place all of our eggs in one basket, because we know and we understand the vulnerability and the vulnerability of this particular industry or this particular product. We know we here in the Caribbean, particularly in small states such as St. Kitts and Nevis, we do not have the final say when it comes to CBI. We have to rely on our interconnected relationships with other countries, particularly international countries. And so the time has come for us, yes, to diversify the economy in a meaningful way, but I am simply putting to the people of Nevis, Mr. President, that we cannot continue to rely solely on CBI investments in order to diversify the economy. We must be able to seek other avenues. It is a risk. It is a significant risk, Mr. President. I work in the industry. I understand it. I also work in the financial industry, and I know at the snap of somebody else's fingers that everything can come tumbling down on us. Our economy can be crippled by a mere decision of either the European Union or the United States of America. If it is that the European Union decided to somewhat withdraw or terminate the Schengen visa initiative that they presently have, for which St. Kitts and Nevis still have visa waiver for most of the Asian and European countries. If one day the European Union decides to do away with that, it's going to have a significant impact on our CBI program, Mr. President, simply because St. Kitts and Nevis, without the visa-free waiver, would no longer be attractive to Asian countries. And so that is something that we have to be mindful of, and it is something that we have to watch and guide cautiously. So, whilst we may enjoy the benefits for this present day, we ought to, in our best efforts, sought to diversify and revitalize the economy so that we can have other economic options. Now, Mr. President, I now turn to paragraph 72, where we are now looking at, I guess, in the initiative of diversifying the economy, we are looking at the agriculture sector. And as reported, I concede that we have seen an increase, perhaps due to COVID-19, to backyard gardening and farming, subsistence farming, Mr. President. And I wish to say that perhaps the time has now come for the government to pay some specific attention, going beyond providing bags of feed and providing small subsistence assistance to farmers, but looking at agriculture development perhaps on a larger scale. The time has perhaps come for us to go back to large-scale agricultural farming. I know, Mr. President, that some initiatives were being made. However, I suppose that due to the COVID-19, that it would have impacted this industry somewhat significantly. And so, Mr. President, it is reported here that persons need to keep the momentum and keep an heightened interest in agriculture. However, Mr. President, I wish to add that as a part of a stimulus package or as a part of an initiative to really drive this sector, the government must look at agriculture at a larger scale. Having examined the budget, I note that there is no mention for the extensive development of any type of agriculture produce our product on Nevis within this budget. And so I dare ask members opposite the question as to what are the fiscal policies to somewhat drive the momentum that they so speak about and encourage persons to keep within this budget. And we are talking here not in terms of small scale or medium scale. We are looking at long-term sustainability. We are looking at today, 2020, and beyond to 2030. And so, Mr. President, once again, we note that efforts are being made. However, greater effort is needed, Mr. President. I see the honorable member looking for ideas. But honorable member, if you need ideas, honorable member, perhaps, honorable member, you may have to seek a private consultation. Perhaps, honorable member, perhaps. No. The people of St. Thomas's know the ideas, but I also know the trend of this house because I have been listening to the budget from since a very child. And what normally happens is that you present shell budgets with the hope that the other side would come and give you the ideas, but not today. Not today at all. Not today at all. Now, Mr. President, if I may move to look at the people-centered approach to economic recovery, Mr. President. And I'm looking specifically at paragraphs 113 to 118. Now, Mr. President, we note that the government has provided for what they call a direct ease by relaxing the payment of enforcement measures for basic utilities such as water and electricity. However, Mr. President, I wish to say that whilst we welcome the initiative, again, if we are talking about a people-centered approach to economic activity, these little ease of burden or little stimulus may or may not have a significant impact on adopting a meaningful and deliberate approach to economic recovery. Again, Mr. President, the people of Nevis are hurting. Over 200 persons, perhaps more, have been laid off due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as such, Mr. President, we note, and the government has also mentioned here in this budget, that they are not in a position to employ new persons, and perhaps naturally so. But, Mr. President, I wish to say that the time has come for the government to consider a serious and more instrumental and effective people-serving fiscal policy. And there is no two-way about it, Mr. President. The reality is that if we want to empower people, we first have to create an avenue for people to be able to create their own jobs, their own opportunities, and to build their own wealth. Giving putting 30,000, allotting 30,000 in a budget in terms of relief for assistance with utility bills is not sufficient, Mr. President. Mr. President, our people need advancement and serious advancement in opportunities for technical and professional training, serious and deliberate opportunities for poverty alleviation. And if you look at the budget, Mr. President, you would note that the government has allotted the amount of 500,000 EC dollars in their budget to drive and empower programs targeting education and training, skill development, and poverty alleviation. Mr. President, these are all blanket statements. We don't know what this means. There is no indication, there is no guidance as to what type of programs, what type of fiscal policies, what type of training, to what extent, whether we are talking about small term, small size, medium size, large scale. There is no guidance. It's just simply a figure and then some words on paper talking about education and training, skills development, and poverty alleviation. But if we were to dissect it with some level of prudency, Mr. President, and I note in this budget also, just making a comparative analysis to the allotment for these type of significant people-centered initiatives, there is a consultation that the government is perhaps willing to undertake that has the same allotment for what the government intends to spend on these extensive and large-scale initiatives. So here it is, we have a government that is willing to spend for a consultation the same 500,000 EC dollars, and that is on page, well, I can't seem to find the page, Mr. President, but I will come back to that. But I would have read it. So the government is willing to pay 500,000 for a simple consultation, but at the same time, in their people-focused and people-centered approach to economic recovery, here we are. We have the same government allotting 500,000 EC dollars, and I want the people to hear me and understand what I am saying, to education and training. And education and training involves, in this budget, all aspects of education and training. So we are talking about from nursery level right up to perhaps sixth form and even tertiary level. We also have here skills development. What type of skills, Mr. President? Mr. President, I am referring to paragraph 118. If it is perhaps not clear in the budget for me, it is also not clear in the budget for the people of Nevis, because it comes under the heading of people-centered approach to economic recovery. And so I am simply stating to the members opposite that if it is that you are presenting a budget that is centered on people-centered approach to economic recovery, then be a bit more concise, no man. State it. State what is your people-centered approach, and state precisely what are your fiscal policies in order to empower, promote, or encourage that economic recovery in a people-centered approach. To merely put something in a paragraph in your budget stating that this is what we have for training for skills development and for poverty alleviation, I am simply saying that the figure is somewhat too small, and I stand to be corrected, and perhaps you can rebut it when it's your time to speak. I am simply saying that that is not sufficient for these three major headings that could somewhat be dissected. And if it is that it was your intention, or this wasn't your intention, or I am misconstruing it, I am simply saying it is simply because you were not sufficiently concise, and this is perhaps mere fluff, which is a true representation of the entire budget. So, English is indeed a funny language, but some of us are trained to read between the lines and trained to understand the camouflage. So, if it is that I misconstrue it, I take that. However, perhaps next time you would be more clear and concise in your budget. Yes, Honorable Member opposite. The budget is crystal clear and empty. We can all concede. Now, Mr. President, if we look at page 31 in the budget, and I am referring specifically now to paragraph 119, and we are looking at education and human resource development. And once again, the COVID-19 pandemic is used as perhaps an excuse as to why we have not seen any major development in terms of education within St. Kitts and Nevis, within Nevis, sorry. And I want to specifically refer to paragraph 121, Mr. President. And I must commend the government on their initiative to introduce the Microsoft Teams platform, albeit it was introduced somewhat late in the third term before the summer break. Nevertheless, I must applaud them on their initiative because I'm sure some children may have benefited. But here we have it in this particular paragraph, Mr. President, where it stated, and let me read so that I do not misconstrue anything to anybody. The survey resulted in over 50 homes being conducted or reconnected with internet services. 50 homes for a population of what, 10,000, with 3 months free access. This was made possible through the partnership between the government and our local internet providers. And through this partnership, Mr. President, over 300 brand new tablets were loaned. And members of the public, the key word here is loaned. 300 brand new tablets were loaned to students. And this investment is made possible for students to participate in online and virtual classes while we experience the COVID-19 stay-in-place restrictions. Now, Mr. President, I wish to take some time to address the people of Nevis and my constituents on this, because this perhaps more than anything is hurtful. And if not hurtful, it is somewhat insulting that the government of today, in the year of 2020, could state that a mere 300 brand new tablets, which were loaned, not given, not gifted, loaned to students. Loan, they obviously mean that they have to return it at some point in time, is an investment. Mr. President, and we wish to compare and perhaps contrast this to in the past under the NIA-led Nevis Island administration, where we would have seen, through a collaborative effort with the federal government, where students, secondary school students, were given laptops, not 300, far more than 300, and not on loan, Mr. President, not on loan, but they had them to have for themselves. It was a gift, Mr. President. And the honorable member who is now interrupted me, he would have been, at that time, very critical of the initiative. Very critical, Mr. President. And I can recall him saying on one of his radio shows that it's a waste, it is not needed, because he himself have about 2 or 3 or 4 laptops in his house, so it wasn't needed. But Mr. President, with the benefit of hindsight, fast forward to today, when we are now experiencing this COVID-19 pandemic, when we are now suffering, where we had to teach our children online in their homes, had this government continued that program, Mr. President, the children of Nevis would have had the benefit of having a laptop at their disposal as a gift to use whenever they're free, whenever they want to. And so, Mr. President, it would have gone a long way in helping our children not only to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic, but it would have greater prepared them to be able to do online classes. And I therefore say, Mr. President, because I wish to make the comparison now on public record, that I know, because at that time, my 8-year-old son was enrolled in a public school. And so school would have closed obviously early for the Easter vacation. And I was waiting for the initiative as to what would take place with my son in terms of his education. And after waiting and waiting, I learned that the private schools were already on their way in offering online education to the children of Nevis. And so I, as a parent, taking into consideration my son's education and being concerned, I had to take my son from the public school because they were not ready yet. They were still awaiting tablets and laptops and doing training for teachers to go on the platform, the Microsoft Teams. And we all know that that did not happen, that whole project was not actually initiated until June. And so can you imagine the children had to go at least 2 months without any access to education, and that happened. It happened because I had to take my child from the public school and enroll him into a private school so that he can have access and so that his education would not have been hampered. And so, Mr. President, I am just saying that when we see things that can really advance people, when we see initiatives that are really people-centered, Mr. President, we must stop being so partisan, and we must really have the foresight, have the initiative to really see the benefit of the policy, Mr. President. And so, those children, perhaps by now, the initiative might have been extended to primary school students and even teachers. But who knows? Who knows? Because this government, those members, honorable members sitting opposite to me, decided and made the decision once they got into government in 2013 that they would no longer be a part of that program. And so, Mr. President, when we are here talking about investment here is just a word, but what is the meaning? Cannot be investment if you're loaning a measly 300 brand new tablets to students. That is not investment, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, I see the members up getting excited, but we have to move on. Time is of the essence. Mr. President, we now come to healthcare. And before I go to healthcare, I just wish to add one more point, Mr. President, because one of my dear constituents told me about this issue. And, Mr. President, you would see over the years that the NIA has really put a lot of effort and resources in primary school education and tertiary education, and to some extent, preschool education. But, Mr. President, I wish to say that the life cycle of our children in terms of their learning and development really begins at 6 months. And so, parents are left with the burden of providing care for their children during the age of 6 months to 3 years old, when they really qualify to go to preschool. And the nurseries, the nurseries and the early childhood care education providers, they have been crying out for assistance from this government in terms of having some resources, having some access, even having the benefit, Mr. President, for their businesses of some tax alleviation in order to subsidize them and assist them with their initiatives in terms of providing early childhood education and primary care for the children of Nevis. And so this is an area, and I do not see it here in the budget, but this is an area that perhaps the Ministry of Education, because I know, Mr. President, that the Ministry of Education has been instrumental in regulating these early childhood care providers. They develop the policies, but while they are extending one hand to assist them with regulation of policies and to ensure that those policies are enforced, the second hand is not coming out to give them assistance in terms of providing resources, whether it be tangible or intangible in terms of taxes or alleviation of taxes. Mr. President, I am simply saying that the early childhood providers, they are somewhat neglected. And when I say early childhood, I am talking about daycares, places like stepping stones. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an adverse effect, just like every other sector, on them. And so they too had to lay off staff. They had to cut the intake of the number of children that they would normally take in order to comply with the COVID-19 protocols. But, Mr. President, I am just sensitizing the member opposite that early childhood providers, they provide an education to the children too, and they are also a part of the education process. And so they too must be considered, Mr. President. I can go even further, Mr. President. Last week, we had the opening of the Newcastle police station. And I'm not going to touch too much on that at this point. I may come back to it later. And whilst we welcome the effort of putting adequate facilities and resources in place to ensure that our police officers are comfortable and that they can perhaps have that comfort in executing their duties and have modern-day resources and what have you, I wish to do a comparative analysis of the government's agenda when it comes to providing education. And education here does not mean formal education. It goes beyond what is offered in primary school and secondary school. Education here means technical skills. Education does not stop when a person leaves school. Education continues throughout the life cycle. And so, whilst I see some initiatives, so I would not say, and I would be very wrong to say, that they have not done anything. I see some initiative taking place, and it's also listed here in the budget for a technical wing to be placed at the Gingerland Secondary School. And I note that. Under construction. Yes. But, Mr. President, the truth is, and through you, I speak to the people of Nevis, that if it is that this government had any sort of long-term economic fiscal policy, long-term vision, or if it is indeed that they were visionary at all, this government would have seen it fit by now to ensure that they have, invest, build, construct, whatever you want to call it, a state-of-the-art technical center, similar to the one in St. Kitts, rather than just having an extension of something at the Gingerland Secondary School. But, Mr. President, I note that you have to start somewhere. But I am simply saying to the public that perhaps when we are seeking grants and seeking assistance from international bodies such as our good partner and friend, the Taiwanese, rather than just looking at police stations, perhaps the time has come for us to look at meaningful at our educational development and people advancement. The time has come for now for us to focus on technological and technical skills. And to do so, Mr. President, we need a state-of-the-art skills center, technical institute. That is the level. All other countries have done it, Mr. President, with the exception of Nevis. So I don't know what happened to us here. But bear in mind, I welcome the initiative of starting somewhere. Now, Mr. President, I now move to another area of great concern for the people of Nevis, and that is our healthcare situation. Now, Mr. President, when we look at healthcare in Nevis, it is something that is perhaps dear to every single Nevian and something that we hold fast to our heart, because one of the significant indicator of development in any country is the healthcare system that it has. And noted somewhere in this budget, I believe it was paragraph 7, if I recall. Hopefully I was not too sleepy last night. I note that the mover of the bill stated that Nevis had an enviable healthcare system. Enviable. And, Mr. President, enviable is somewhat subjective, because I don't know who, where, when, why, what, and how would be enviable of the present state of our healthcare in Nevis when we have to go offshore for simple procedures such as an MRI. But like I said, Mr. President, enviable is subjective. And so, Mr. President, if we were to talk seriously now, we're having some serious ladies and grown gentlemen discussions about healthcare in Nevis. Mr. President, there is a dire need for some serious and significant attention to be paid to the healthcare situation in Nevis. And I wish to ask the mover of the bill, what is taking place with the extension of the new wing at the Alexandra Hospital? I note here that there is some mention of that in the budget, but it is well ongoing over somewhat 3 years now since we have seen the undertaking of that project, and it has not really materialized, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, one is left to wonder, when will the unit actually be completed? And also, one is also left to wonder how much funds have since the construction process, been exhausted on this project. From where I stand, Mr. President, and from my observation, it appears that this unit has undergone some significant wastage, and also, I am told, Mr. President, that the government now have to consider making some significant changes to the structure, the design structure of the unit or the extension, based on the recommendations of PAO, because the building originally, when it was designed, was not designed for that of a hospital. And so, Mr. President, I ask, what is taking place with that project? How long do we have to continue to wait to see it be completed? And once it is completed, Mr. President, what services would be offered there to the people of Nevis? It's something that is long and waiting, going on now for a number of years, and we are somewhat growing impatient, Mr. President, because healthcare is very vital and crucial to the people of Nevis. And therefore, Mr. President, we wish to see the perhaps fast, expedient completion of this new wing that the government so boastfully mentioned in their budget. Now, Mr. President, while we are on health care, I wish to just make a few brief comments about the healthcare situation in Nevis. Now, we all know that the Alexandra Hospital is in need of great improvements, perhaps from a physical level, as well as in terms of services. Now, we cannot continue in this day of 2019 having our citizens having to go to St. Kitts for simple medical procedures or analysis or checks, whatever you would call it, which includes MRI services, CT scans, things like that. The time has now come for these things to be embedded at the Alexandra Hospital. Mr. President, when it comes to the type of service that is being provided by healthcare officials in Nevis, I have observed, and perhaps you have observed too, Mr. President, that there is a need for nurses in Nevis. When I look at the composition of the nurses at the Alexandra Hospital, I note that there needs to be perhaps some younger nurses to assist the older nurses. Mr. President, on a point of note, I was made aware that the matron and the deputy matron is scheduled to leave the service shortly. And I would like to know what plans or what initiatives the government are being put in place in order to replace these two key significant health officials at the Alexandria Hospital. And so probably that is something that the minister with responsibility for health can update the public on when he does his presentation. Mr. President, I cannot speak about health without touching on dialysis. I would not make a comment. But what I would like to ask the members opposite is whether they have any intention, if any at all, to ensure that a dialysis unit is placed at the Alexandria Hospital. Simple comment, we have heard discussions about it. I know the NRP-led administration up until 2013 was aggressively trying to get a dialysis unit in place at the Alexandria Hospital. And this is no laughing matter, Mr. President, because persons have died due to the lack of care and attention when it came to dialysis in Nevis. And so it is a very serious matter. And my intentions as it relates to this particular item are very pure, and I am just merely echoing the voice of many Nevians who are currently suffering with kidney and renal failure and who have to go over to St. Kitts and other neighboring islands to get dialysis treatment. And so, with a people-centered budget, Mr. President, it is quite shocking, if not surprising, that there is no mention of dialysis anywhere in this budget. And it begs one to really wonder, how people-centered is this budget, Mr. President? And the members of the public can see the reaction of the members opposite when that issue was raised. Now, moving on, Mr. President. But it is within my right to give the epistle, not so? Well, I can say what I want and change my mind, not so. Is this not a democracy? We don't have democracy when we come into this honorable house, Mr. President. I believe we still do, so I am entitled to comment and then change my mind. And I am well within my time, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we now want to turn to housing. And spare me just 1 second while I gather my notes on as it relates to housing. Now, housing, Mr. President. Of course, in a people-centered budget, we expect there would be some mention of solution for our housing needs because people need houses. And so, Mr. President, having observed this budget, I note, and I am referring specifically to paragraph 151 of the budget, where the honorable member reported that during this fiscal year, despite the disruptions in daily activities due to the onset of the pandemic, the Housing Corporation was able to undertake construction work on a total of 20 houses at a cost of $4.88 million. These houses were constructed in Madden, Cedar View, Housing Development Phase 2, Cahoons, Bath Plains, Nisbet Estate. Now, Mr. President, I ask, and once again, we always welcome the initiative when it comes to houses because people need homes and people need affordable homes. So, Mr. President, I see here now with a projection for 2021 where the government would be on an initiative to build and distribute no less than 40 affordable houses to applicants with all amenities. These houses will be a mixture of 4 to 3 to 2 bedroom homes. But, Mr. President, I ask you, the people of Nevis, through you, how substantial, how mega, how people focus is it for a government to be delivering through the Nevis Housing and Land Corporation a mere 40 affordable homes throughout all constituencies in Nevis for a fiscal year? No less than 40. Okay? Well, tell us how much you were able to build over the past 8-year period. That's not really mentioned in your budget, but nevertheless, I didn't have sufficient time to read it, honorable member. So next time, so that I can make meaningful contribution to this debate, the onus is on you, honorable member, to ensure done away with tradition, honorable member, and to ensure so that we can have meaningful discussions and we can educate the people of Nevis. Done away with the tradition of giving me less than 24, a member opposite less than 24 hours to really debate something of this nature. We would deeply appreciate it, Mr. Premier.
Pay attention and you'll be done in hours, couple hours. Pay attention.
Mr. Premier, all I'm simply saying, if it is that you are stating that I am misconstruing information, provide me with it sooner. I believe I am a bright girl. I could read things. Give me enough time to dissect it, and I would be able to make significant contributions, and then you would not be over there interrupting me. So let's practice that for next time, Mr. Premier. So, Mr. President, the point is, Mr. President, that we would like to see in these budgets of this nature, because this is the people agenda here, this is the people agenda. One time a year we get it. And so when it comes to this house, it must be sufficiently concise and it must outline in clear terms the initiatives of the government. It is well and good that the government put things out on social media or through the media. But if you are presenting a budget for us to come into this honorable house, to debate and to discuss and to have discussions and to talk about the future of Nevis and the fiscal policies and to drive the economy because it needs driving, Mr. President, then I am simply saying to the members opposite, make your budget. Put more into it. Give it life. Give it breath. Explain it so that people like me can understand it. Mr. President, I wish to tell the... Mr. President? Mr. President, I wish to say... Mr. President, you see why they produce these type of budgets? Nevertheless, Mr. President, I wish to say that housing must be a priority in Nevis. And with this budget for 40 houses at a cost of 4.8 million, I am simply saying, Mr. President, that it is perhaps not aggressive enough, and it does not offer sufficient opportunities to the people of Nevis. We take into consideration, Mr. President, we take into consideration the present time of COVID-19. But, Mr. President, some of us are using COVID-19 somewhat as a scapegoat for bare budgets, for the lack of vision, economic vision, for any serious attention or thought, deliberate thought, towards fiscal and economic planning. And that is why, Mr. President, I dare say, and I go back to my first recommendation, that perhaps the time has come for the government, if they are serious about driving the economic activity of Nevis, if they are serious about deliberate fiscal policies that would advance the life of people of Nevis, that they should consider hiring economic strategists in order to give them guidance, because this budget is a reflection that that guidance and expertise is needed. And so I would leave that there. Now, Mr. President, as we speak about diversifying the economy, we have to consider looking at ways to diversify the economy in a meaningful way. As I would have alluded before, Mr. President, we cannot continue to rely solely on the CBI project for revenue generation. We also cannot continue to rely on grants.
Please. You were asking the question, and it was indicated that it is the number of houses constructed
Yes.
for a period.
Yes.
It's in the budget. If you look at paragraph 151, the last line, well, the last line, it says 2013 to 2020 to 189 houses at a cost of $42.7 million. That is the number you're looking for.
Yes, Mr. President,
Yeah.
and I note that, and I do thank you for your guidance, Mr. President. However, Mr. President, the point I was making, and perhaps yourself and the members opposite misconstrued the point, what I am simply saying, the number of houses that are being constructed at this cost and at the rate is not sufficient to meet the needs and demands of the people of Nevis. Now, I take it that the government is perhaps doing the best they can, but we can do some comparison, Mr. President. I really didn't want to have to go there, but we can do some comparisons as to what the number of houses that the Nevis Reformation Party-led government would have produced in a lesser period. And I'm simply saying, Mr. President, that I note COVID-19, but this budget and the budget of the previous years have not been sufficiently aggressive in order to meet the needs and demands of the people of Nevis. We are talking about what? 115 houses in what, almost an 8-year period, Mr. President? We are talking about 20 houses in 1 year with a projection of 40 for the next fiscal year. I am simply saying that it needs to be a bit more aggressive, particularly as this is a people-centered budget and taking into consideration the fact that the government has in here a stimulus drive in order to rejuvenate the construction industry. So when we take all of this into consideration in a holistic manner, Mr. President, I am simply saying that the budget, where this is concerned, yes, we have the information because we have to go through this exercise, but if we were to look at it with some level of objectivity and prudency, I am simply saying it does not satisfy the needs of the people of Nevis. It is not sufficiently aggressive, Mr. President. And that is the simple point that I am making. Okay?
Yeah, well, we really don't have any chance. You know.
So, Mr. President, bear with me.
Take another hour.
Bear with me, Mr. President.
You lose the script.
For a bit.
Don't let these fellas distract you now. Focus.
No, Mr. President. Mr. President, whilst we are here debating our people-centered budget, I must say that the attention given to the people's business is somewhat immature, and it is a clear reflection, Mr. President, of the government's approach towards the economic and fiscal state of Nevis. It is somewhat immature, and that is exactly what they have presented here, an immature budget, a meaningless budget. So, in light of that, members opposite may very well want to take heed and pay attention to some of the things that the member opposite is perhaps alluding to them. It might prove, Mr. President, it might prove to be very beneficial next year. Now, Mr. President, I wish to spend some time to speak about, as we continue along this path of economic rejuvenation, the value-added tax, which is the VAT. And Mr. President, I make reference specifically to paragraphs 25 and 26 of the budget. More specifically so, Mr. President, paragraph 26. Now, it was stated that during the period of January to October 2020, VAT collected at the Inland Revenue Department and domestic services amount to 11.69 million. 20.15 decrease when compared to the amount of 14.6 million collected for the corresponding period of VAT in 2019. VAT collected at Customs Department for a similar period in 2020 was 11.6 million, representing a 17.64 decrease when compared to 13.5 million collected the same time in 2019. Now, Mr. President, I wish through you to ask the government, based on this analysis, can we truly say that the collection of VAT under the current regime is proven to be beneficial to the citizens of Nevis? That is what is presented in their budget. We have seen a reduction in VAT revenue. And so, Mr. President, as part of the stimulus package and as part of the initiative to rejuvenate the economy, I must ask the question whether the arrangement of collecting the 24% VAT, which comprises of the VAT collected in Nevis, if that is proving to be beneficial to divisions, or perhaps we should have gone with the prior initiative of collecting a portion of the consolidated VAT collection. And Mr. President, I am just barely asking these questions because I am seeing here that VAT is continuously over the period declining the collection, which means that, therefore, it gives some explanation as to why revenue is declining in St. Kitts and Nevis. So it is just a question for the other side to contemplate and to deliberate on as to whether we are any better off today when it comes to collection of VAT under this present existing arrangement in comparison to what we had before when we had a consolidated, when we were getting a percentage of a consolidated VAT collection. So, Mr. President, that is something for them to consider, but I just wish the people of Nevis to note that despite what the government will tell you, we are not seeing significant returns on our VAT collection here in Nevis, which is significantly registering a decline in revenue. Now, Mr. President, I now wish to turn our attention, and as we speak about economic diversification, I wish to now speak about the offshore sector, Mr. President. Redefining the financial service sector as it is coined in the budget at paragraph 83 on page 21. Now, Mr. President, I am quite pleased to learn in this budget at paragraph 90 that the corporate registry has integrated the corporate registry integrated search system, which will be an internet-based, user-friendly to facilitate online access to approximately 75% of the services currently being offered at the company's registry. Now, Mr. President, I welcome this initiative. I think it is somewhat long overdue. But I wish to dissect this initiative somewhat for the benefit of the people of Nevis. Now, Mr. President, at present, and I would have mentioned this before, St. Kitts and Nevis is in the lower ranking of the World Bank Index of the ease at which we do business. And this is a sector, the financial services sector and the offshore sector, in present day 2020, is affected by a number of factors. It is a vulnerable industry, Mr. President. And therefore, some thought need to be alluded to this process. Because while it is well and good to have an internet-based user-friendly system, my question for the members opposite, is whether this system would be able to put Nevis at a level of doing business when it comes to corporate registry and the incorporation of companies at a level and standard as our other countries such as BVI, Anguilla, Estonia, and even Cyprus. Would this system be able to enhance our efficiency in terms of processing applications and also in terms of conducting due diligence? And Mr. President, this particular point could be tied back to the point that I made earlier in relation to the ease of doing business when it comes to land transfers. So we are taking the initiative to have something that we can access online, but does this mean that it will increase the efficiency, the speed, the turnaround time of which applications are processed? I don't know. It did not say that in this budget, Mr. President. It merely says that there is an online platform that will be introduced. As to what it does, it did not clearly and concisely outline those things. So that's limited at paragraph 91. Now, Mr. President, the offshore industry is an industry that has been in existence since the 1980s. I believe, once again, it was somewhat introduced by the late Dr. Simeon Daniel. And, Mr. President, I wish to make the point that since that time, we have not really seen robust growth and development in that industry. It has been somewhat stagnant. And I say this cautiously, Mr. President, because I am very mindful that the government generates some significant revenue from the processing of applications. However, I am also mindful, having read the report of the Director of Audit, that revenues collected from regulation has been on the decline for the past 2 years. That is noted there. But, Mr. President, on a point of suggestion and perhaps recommendation, we have to take into consideration the ease at which we're able to do business, and we have to also compare ourselves here in Nevis, although we are small, to other countries, and I listed them, such as Estonia and Cyprus, and even the BVI, where they have thriving offshore industries, and they are able to process applications within real time. Mr. President, in a people-centered and a people-focused budget, it serves no point for us to go through these initiatives of having online systems, of enhancing our website, if it is not going to bring more business to the shores of Nevis. Mr. President, I work in the industry, and so I can tell you a bit about the challenges that are presently facing that industry. And one such challenge, Mr. President, is one, being able to process applications at real time. The turnaround time is too long if we are going to make a significant or viable, if we are going to be a competitor in this market, Mr. President, we must be able to offer these services to our clients, both onshore and offshore, within a real time. The turnaround time must be super fast. And also, Mr. President, the industry, of course, just like the CBI, because it is an extension of the CBI product, is somewhat vulnerable. It is very vulnerable. And whilst I see in the report that we were due for a mutual evaluation early this year, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, that has been postponed, and perhaps we may very well have it in the first quarter of next year, Mr. President, we must pay some significant attention to the offshore industry in Nevis in particular, because I do believe, Mr. President, that there is greater need for the revamping of that industry in terms of us being able to offer services online in real time, not just online, because oftentimes you find, even though the service is offered online, you still have a bureaucratic process where applications are held up simply because of issues such as staff constraints, issues such as maintenance in services of these online online platforms. And so, Mr. President, I am simply saying that whilst I welcome the initiative would not prove fruitful unless it is designed to give greater efficiency to our turnaround time in processing applications, in being able to conduct due diligence on persons. And Mr. President, whilst I am on the offshore sector, I wish to say that we have seen some significant red tapes in this particular industry. Red tapes to the extent that sometimes those red tapes also precludes us from doing business at the standard and the level and at the rate of efficiency which we perhaps would expect or need to do in order to be competitive with countries such as the BVI and Cyprus and what have you. So in our strategic attempts to modernize that system, we have to look to see what our counterparts are doing, how are they able to continue to have a thriving industry despite the COVID-19 pandemic, and we must somewhat imitate those initiatives so that we can have a solid product that would significantly drive the offshore industry here in Nevis, and so that come next year, when the government report on its budget, that it would clearly demonstrate that the regulation and corporate services have generated a revenue, an increase in revenue in this area. So, Mr. President, I take the note, but I must say that we have to done with all these bureaucratic red tapes. We must be able to present and do due diligence within real time, and there needs to be a conscious effort to be made towards ensuring that the offshore sector, yes, it is fully compliant with the CITAF recommendations, however, that at the same time, whilst being compliant, that it also is positioned to generate significant revenue to assist in the diversification of our economy. Now, Mr. President, I cannot debate or make arguments for the diversification of our economy without touching on our resources, natural resources, that is. And so, Mr. President, I am keen to find out what is taking place with the state of geothermal in Nevis. I note that it is not significantly mentioned, if at all mentioned, in the budget. But, Mr. President, I have observed, and perhaps the people of Nevis have observed, that for the past decade, we have been hearing about the development of geothermal energy in Nevis, but to date, nothing has really materialized. And, Mr. President, I wish to add that the mover of this budget has been involved in discussions as it relates to geothermal in Nevis from since 2004, if I recall, at least 16 years. And to date, we still have not really made any significant progress as it relates to geothermal in this country. And one have to ask, what is the reason for that? What is taking place with geothermal? During the period of 2017, we note that the government was instrumental in their initiative to do some experiments in terms of rigging, and we want to know what were the result of that. Are we still of this same mind? Can we expect geothermal at some point in the near future? Or is it just an election gimmick that geothermal gets life whenever we are nearing a local election? Is there any meaningful and significant progress towards geothermal in this budget? I am not seeing it, Mr. President. So I am simply asking for the people of Nevis, for their benefit, because it is something that they are looking to, in order to alleviate the burden of having to pay for energy and fuel in Nevis. We are somewhat looking for some sort of subsistence or assistance when it comes to energy conservation in a meaningful way in Nevis. So I'm simply asking the question, what's happening? Where are we with that? Is it something that we can look forward to? And yes, we christened the baby, and what did you do with the baby? You aborted it? Well, it appears that you have aborted it. So whether it was born or not, it appears. So Mr. President, I conclude that the members opposite are reporting that they have aborted the geothermal project, so therefore Nevisians perhaps do not need to look forward to it anymore. Okay? Was not mentioned in the budget, and I note that. No significant impact. We were waiting, but we're not seeing it.
Find out before you come. You're welcome to step with the basket.
Mr. President, we have not heard well, we have heard in recent times, perhaps last week, it was reported that with the NREI, there were some further discussions with them, and perhaps the government has to go back and look at the pricing as it relates to geothermal. One is left to wonder why, because in 2017 it was all good and they had the best deal and the best product. And now in 2020, we are hearing that we have to do some renegotiation. So I will give them the opportunity to inform the public as to what is taking place as it relates to geothermal, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am very mindful that I am now nearing my time. And so,
enjoy yourself now, because you won't last long.
In my conclusion, Mr. President, in my conclusion, I wish to say that I understand the efforts and the need to go through the exercise of presenting our budget. I know this is perhaps more ceremonial and traditional. However, it is my respectful view, Mr. President, that this budget does not really give Nevisians the hope that we perhaps would have, the hope and assurance that we perhaps would have needed as we go through this COVID-19 pandemic. It does not give a bright and meaningful outlook in terms of the government's initiative to provide economic stimulation that will significantly create or generate new revenue for the people of Nevis. It does not address the concerns, despite being a people-centered budget, that people genuinely would have as it relates to employment, as it relates to healthcare, as it relates to training and education, as it relates to diversifying the economy in a meaningful way, as it relates to diversification of the economy in terms of green energy, blue energy, or even in terms of the orange or digital initiatives. No mention of those in this budget for 2020, Mr. President. So I say, Mr. President, that of course, Nevisians have to continue to go through the burden of the economic plight, not knowing what the future lies in store for them. And I must say, Mr. President, that the outlook based on this budget is very, very dismal. It is nothing to get excited about. It is nothing that creates hope and aspirations for the people of Nevis. Once again, the NIA has presented a tax-driven budget based on the initiative of developing roads, infrastructure development. And yes, the people of Nevis welcome infrastructure development because we all need it. But Mr. President, beyond that, or in addition to that, or to supplement that, Mr. President, we would have loved to see some sort of meaningful and substantial drive of the economy to give Nevisians an ease, Mr. President, from this economic plight that was existing before COVID-19, that continue to exist during the COVID-19 global pandemic, and perhaps will continue to exist post-COVID-19, because this budget did not give us, the people of Nevis, any assurance that this government is taking the economic stability of Nevis seriously. I thank you for the opportunity, Mr. President.
That's why I vote for you as leader. Make sure you're better than the rest.
Okay, just for in-house matter. Member opposite. Member opposite. I would like to speak with you after the session. Please bear that in mind.
Mr. President.
Just
This was not
No,
used for
sorry.
the. This
Yeah.
was not used.
it was not used.
It was not used
Fine.
for the day.
Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution in this honorable House and to add Philip to the discussion on the bill shortly entitled Nevis Appropriation 2021 Ordinance 2020. The theme for this year's budget is rebuilding our economy, a people-centered approach to economic recovery. Mr. President, the economic shutdown which we have experienced over the past 9-10 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic is not only unprecedented, but it is historical. Never before in the world has leaders come together to close down its borders, to close down sectors, economic sectors. And I believe, Mr. President, that this was done to preserve the lives of its people, especially the frontline persons, because much would have been required of them to fight this dreaded disease. And from the very onset, Mr. President, from yesterday and for the morning session so far, you would have heard the words used interchangeably: COVID-19, the coronavirus, the global pandemic. And that is so because it gives you a bird's eye view as to what the entire world is dealing with from March or prior to March this year. It came to light in our area as of March this year. But even as we go through this very trying time of the coronavirus, there are so many important lessons that we can learn, because this dreaded disease has tested greatly our systems, and it has highlighted the gaps and the inadequacies of our systems, but for a greater good. And so COVID has tested our workplace safety and security. How prepared are we in our workspaces to combat eventualities such as these? It is coronavirus now. What would be the next? Do we have building codes? Do we have station drills? Do we adhere to the 6 feet social distancing? And so it makes us look at how we are in our workplaces and how ready we are for eventualities such as these. The coronavirus has also tested how we communicate, how we do business, how we filter and we disseminate information. We have now seen businesses operating differently. Some businesses have put their entire business online, and so persons are now ordering services, ordering merchandise, paying bills online. And these were done because of the COVID pandemic, Mr. President. So we have to look at the coronavirus as not only the dreaded disease that it is, but as a blessing in disguise, because it has forced us to become more creative in the way that we do things. Mr. President, the coronavirus has also taught us how to do things in an alternate way. And I am certain when the Minister of Education comes, he will speak at an extended period about how education is dealing with coronavirus, how they would have stepped up to the challenge. We hear so much about the Microsoft Teams and the different platforms that they have now been using. Prior to March this year, we would have never thought about doing business this way, about learning this way, about disseminating information this way. But because of the COVID, we have been exposed to different ways of learning, different ways of communicating, and different ways of doing business. And it forces us ultimately to look at how the public service is run, how social support is operating. And it begs the question, Mr. President, how effective is our social safety net? How are we looking and caring for our people? These are some of the major ways in which our system has been tested at this time. But what we can say is that it is all for good. At this time, we can now put things in place to remedy all that we would have not done before. This could make our system better. And as the theme suggests, building our economy, a people-centered approach, all these are new initiatives that we can take to rebuild our economy at this time. The second part of the theme speaks to a people-centered approach. If we are to rebuild, then people must be at the forefront, the epicenter of our recovery process. And so, Mr. President, we have to train and retrain our people. We have to retool our people and make them fit for purpose. we must, as a matter of urgency, empower our people and equip them with the necessary tools and the necessary skill set that they will need to push our recovery process forward, and so that they themselves can be a part of the whole rebuilding process. And so COVID, as I said, in and of itself is not entirely bad, because it presents us with an opportunity to get it right this time, to ensure that we put the necessary protocols in place to bring our economy back to where it once was, and to step forward in a more positive light in the future. It means, therefore, that people must be at the forefront. And that is what this government has sought to do. The budget presented yesterday suggests that people is the forefront of the recovery process. We are cognizant that the pandemic has not impacted persons, everybody the same way. It has impacted persons differently. And so the budget has outlined how it will look at recovery across the board, not only at the persons at the upper level, but it seeks to build around persons from the ground up. Because, as I said, we were all impacted differently. Against this backdrop, Mr. President, the 2021 budget was predicated on this stepping stone. And so the mover of the bill, the Honorable Premier and Minister of Finance, has sought to set out in the budget exactly how this government will approach the recovery process, how it will prioritize its areas, and how it will, what value it would put on all these priority areas moving forward, Mr. President. And so, as I lay out that preamble for you, I want to say that inasmuch as the coronavirus, COVID-19, has slowed down the system, so to speak, it has also given us a chance to put things in place. And that is what this government seeks to do in the budget that was presented here yesterday. And so, Mr. President, the year under review, 2020, it has been a very challenging one. I am certain that we can all agree that 2020 was an extremely challenging year, and that was so because of what we would have gone through due to the pandemic. But I dare say that during these 10 months so far, that at no time, and I dare say at no time during this pandemic so far, that the services at Alexandra Hospital was ever interrupted. We had a state of emergency. We had curfews. We had lockdowns. But the health service remained intact at Alexandra Hospital and at the community level. All health centers were accessible to all over the past 10 months. In an effort to keep things operating, Mr. President, some adjustments had to be made to the 2020 budget. And so additional funds were reallocated. We had to make some adjustments, Mr. President, so that we could operate in a more fluid environment. When we were here last year around the same time passing the 2020 budget, we had no idea that in March of 2021, we would have been impacted. 2020, sorry, when we were here in 2019, we had no inclination that we would have been impacted in this way in 2020. And so it was necessary for us to make some adjustments to the 2020 budget. And I want to thank the Premier, the Minister of Finance, and his team at the Ministry of Finance for working with us, the health team. It was not easy, Mr. President, because we butted heads often in terms of how much money we would need to do what we need to do. And Mr. President, the Premier, and I must say he was very accommodating. But, you know, he would ask questions. Hazel, you again. But it was for the greater good. And I must place on record our thanks to them for really understanding what we were going through and the need for us to make the reallocation at this time. And so during this pandemic-stricken year, Mr. President, as a government, we were able to do a number of things, and I'm going to list them. Give me a chance to list them, Mr. President, because they are worthy of note, and I must spend some time talking to what we would have been able to accomplish during the last 10 COVID pandemic-stricken months. 2 dental x-rays at a cost of $10,000 US. 2 point-of-care machines, chemistry analyzer, and consumables to the tune of $153,000 US. 2 ventilators, $96,000 US. 1 ambulance, $85,000 US. And these were sourced out of budgetary allocations. It was hard, it was tough, but the Premier gave me permission to spend that money, which we did. I want to pause here, Mr. President, and I want to say, for the first time in the history of Nevis, that we would have had 2 new ambulances on the premises at Alexandra. Not 1, but 2. I was told that there were 2 ambulances given in 2007. But these were 2 buses that were retrofitted to be used as ambulance. What I am saying here, Mr. President, is that is the first time in the history of Nevis that we would have had 2 ambulances straight from the manufacturers, fit and manufactured as, outfitted as ambulances. So I want to make that abundantly clear. We would have bought 1 from public funds, and the second was from the Social Security Board. And so I want to place on record, Mr. President, our profound thanks to the Social Security Board for the second ambulance as a part of their annual commitment to the Nevis Island administration. In addition to all that, Mr. President, and this one is huge again, Mr. President, in addition to all that, we were able to regularize the salaries of the nurses. This is huge, Mr. President. This is huge. This is commendable. And so our nurses are now being remunerated effective the 1st of June. Retroactive to June. We applaud the efforts of our nurses, our frontline officers. We take dearly to what they are doing and the commitments that they are making. And so having been able to remunerate them in the way that we have done is commendable. in an effort to continue to provide top-notch health care at Alexandra, during this same period, we employed 2 additional specialists, an anesthesiologist and an internist. And so now at Alexandra, we have these 2 specialized areas covered. However, Mr. President, in the near future, we will have to employ 2 more, because these 2, in as much as they are working well with our team, they would need the adequate rest. Right now, they are working around the clock. And so we have made some provisions in the new budget so that early in the new year, we can have 2 more, and another anesthesiologist and another internist to complement the staff at Alexandra Hospital. We want to say how thankful we are to them. They came to us from Cuba, but they are well versed and fluent in the English language, so they have fitted in quite nicely, Mr. President. And while I'm talking about doctors, I want to place on record our profound thanks to the government of Cuba for the years of friendship that we would have enjoyed. But specifically for this time, they have sent to us a team of 6 persons, an epidemiologist, the doctor, who is specialized in disease control and disease mitigation, and 5 specialized nurses. We are paying them. They are being paid from the Nevis Island Administration coffers, Mr. President. So, I'm lining out to you all that we would have done in a year that has been so hard as it pertains to financing. We have found creative ways to work around our budget, Mr. President, because the people of Nevis, people-centered approach, is first place, up front and center, as it pertains to this government. And so we would have gone the extra mile to ensure that our services are intact and we continue to operate, even though we are fighting a very dreaded disease. We have also, during this time, we have also added a mental counselor to the mental health unit. And we've also added a worker at the health promotion unit to deal with HIV and AIDS. And the reason why we would have done that, Mr. President, we have seen an increase in the number of mental issues. And again, we will continue to hear COVID-19 and the pandemic throughout this debate, because it has indeed exacerbated the situation. The lockdowns, the curfews, the loss of jobs, persons are dealing with a lot of stress. And so we needed to find persons, qualified persons, to help our people, to nurse our people back to good mental health. And so we have added those to our staff. We continue to build capacity due to training. And all I am outlining to you, Mr. President, is about the people-centered approach that we are taking. We have taken this year and will continue to take in the new year. In February of this year, an emergency care for first responders training was organized and facilitated by Four Seasons, the Four Seasons Homeowners Foundation. And we are always welcoming stakeholders and persons who would work with us in terms of facilitating our programs and our different policies. And so during that 5-week period, 16 officers were exposed to that training, and they came from fire and rescue, the health sector, and the police force. And we are indeed grateful to the Four Seasons homeowners for facilitating this very important training. The COVID pandemic, Mr. President, has taught us so many things, and they continue to teach us a lot of lessons. The need for training and retraining, and we have been doing that. The Ministry of Health and Gender Affairs has collaborated with the Ministry of Education in terms of teaching the necessary protocols for the reopening of school. It has collaborated with the Ministry of Tourism in terms of training all the persons in the tourism sector, the taxi drivers, the workers at the hotels, so that they were prepared for when we reopen the borders. And so a maximum of, or a minimum of 200 persons were trained by the Ministry of Health personnel so as to be ready for when we reopen our borders. And so now that the borders have been reopened, Mr. President, they are more trained and they are ready to deal with all the eventualities that will come. Our ultimate goal is to train and retrain. We are in the business, and so we need to detect, we need to track, we need to trace, and we need to treat. And we have trained our personnel in these areas. And I want to add, Mr. President, that in as much as we would have trained 200 persons, there is a personal obligation on all of us. We train, and yes, we continue to train, but we are asking the general public, we are begging, really, that we have to take responsibility for ourselves and for the people around us. And so we encourage persons to continue to adhere to the normal protocols, the washing of hands, the sanitizing, the 6 feet distance, the sneezing and coughing in your elbow, the avoiding large crowds, social distance. If we are to individually adhere to these protocols, then we'll be saving our own lives and we'll be saving the persons in our circles. We cannot overemphasize the need for persons to take care of themselves, to take on that responsibility of first securing yourself, and then you will be able to secure other persons. Mr. President, in the Ministry of Health and Gender Affairs, we have also taken this time to look introspectively at ourselves and how we do business. And so we are in the process of rebranding health services in Nevis. We are encouraging our officers to elevate themselves. During this time, we would have had a number of persons doing courses online. And we encourage it because at the end of the day, we want persons to be qualified, to be confident in themselves that they could give service of a top-notch nature. We want to be able to rival institutions in the diaspora or even further afield based on the service that we would give. And so, Mr. President, let me read for you again. To date, we have 2 nurses who have completed their midwifery training. We have 6 nurses who are currently pursuing bachelor's degree, Mr. President, online. We have 1 nurse who is pursuing a master's degree online. 2 nurses have completed supervisory management. 3 officers are currently pursuing the EMT, or the Emergency Medical Technicians Training in St. Kitts. And we have 2 retired nurses who have returned to assist in the training of our nurses on the job. This is commendable, Mr. President. It is a part of the rebranding process, and our officers have stepped up. They are doing what they need to do to elevate themselves, and so we empower them to rise. And that is exactly what they are doing. Mr. President, I now turn to gender affairs. In the Department of Gender Affairs, we continue our awareness on gender equality. We have been doing a lot of talking. About gender issues. But for some reason, persons are still of the notion that gender issues are women issues. Gender issues are men and women issues alike. It is not a woman-only issue. It is a man and a woman issue. And so at gender, we seek to dispel that notion, and we are trying to put programs in place that would benefit both. To benefit both. Mr. President, I want to speak about a very touching topic, that of gender-based violence and domestic abuse. It is a topic that is not spoken about easily. It is something that is taboo to Nevis or to our conversation, but it is something that is alive and not well in Nevis. We have seen an increase, a drastic increase in the number of cases of domestic abuse and gender-based violence. Some persons would have taken their issues to social media. That is not the place really for it. And we continue to encourage them to come to the ministry. Let's talk about it. For us in Nevis, there are two ministries that deal with such issues. They can either come to gender, or they can go to the social services department, which has a larger scope of workers to deal with such cases. The counseling unit resides with that ministry. The family care service resides with that ministry. And most often, Mr. President, when we have cases of gender-based violence and domestic abuse, there is always, more often than not, the children are involved. Children are in the very center of these abuse. And so what we are seeing, Mr. President, is that abuse by parents and then abuse to children. So it's that double whammy, Mr. President. And so we are asking persons to report these incidences. Forget about the social media for now. And if you really want redress to the issue, you either come to the Ministry of Health and Gender Affairs or you go to social services. I am certain that the good technicians that we have there will be able to deal with these issues. And so in the new year, we are appealing for some more help in this area. We want to see the Special Victims Unit at the police station reactivated with at least 3 officers who are passionate about dealing with these issues. We also want to see a legal counsel be attached to this unit so that cases of abuse could be heard and could be addressed in the court with some alacrity. We have cases that are lingering for years, and that is why we find some of the victims, they either don't want to report because they feel nothing is going to happen, or they end up going back into the situations because nothing is being done. So we are hoping that something could be done and we can get some real beefing up in this area, Mr. President. During the year under review, we have also focused on women's empowerment. And so the department continues to encourage women and young men in small business development and entrepreneurship. I think it was last year in the same house, we spoke at length about the resources that we would have gotten from the government of China, Taiwan, some $5 million. And we are encouraging persons, if you have a novel idea of a business, you can either, and you want more training as to how to start up and run your business, you can either sign up to be a part of the boot camp, or you can go to CEDU and talk to the people at CEDU who will walk you through the process as to how you can be eligible for a soft loan. And so far, Mr. President, we would have had 3 boot camps organized by the Department of Gender. 25 participants have been successful during the 6 weeks duration of the boot camp, and they are now awaiting funding from CEDU. The second phase of the boot camp will be to assign mentors, business persons who could mentor these persons who would have gone through the boot camp training so that they can hold their hands and take them over the first 2 years of the business so that their business could be sustainable. It is always said that the most difficult part of any new startup business, the first 2 years. And during these 2 years, how you operate will determine whether you sink or you float, whether your business will die or it will get some life and it will be sustainable. So we are adding that second component in the new year, Mr. President. There were other skill workshops conducted during the year under gender affairs, and I must add a very important one, that is the backyard gardening. We have a number of persons who are going into backyard gardening, and so we partnered with IECA and agriculture, and we had a workshop, and at that workshop, persons were presented with the grow boxes. And so those persons who were there, they received a grow box, which they will now use in their backyard as their own little nursery. The good people at IECA has also given us some resources to make some additional grow boxes. And I want to believe that the numbers that they have available, they have all been commissioned out. However, it is our intention to revisit this program and to ask maybe another funding agency to come on board so that we can have more grow boxes that we can donate to single mothers, single fathers, as the case may be. I want to go back a little as I spoke about the gender-based violence, and I want to make this abundantly clear as well. In as much as we will know about the gender-based violence as it affects women, I want to say here that statistics have shown that 40% of our men are abused as well. But we cannot deal with those cases that are not reported. More often than not, when the women will come forward and make a complaint, the men will not come. And so we cannot address those issues. So I don't want to for 1 minute believe that it's only women alone are being abused. Men are being abused as well. But I am appealing to the men that they ought to come forward and seek help. I also want to appeal to our armed forces that when a man comes to the police station to report a case, please don't laugh at them. They are intimidated. They don't want to come to make complaints because they are being laughed at. They are being scoffed at. Well, that's what they report to me. They have been laughed at. They have been scoffed at by the persons at the police station who are there to look after and to protect them. And so I want to say the same, I want for it to be a situation where the same way they can feel comfortable to come and speak to me, that they can go and make a complaint at the police station as well. However, it is in our to-do list that we will have some sensitization program with our armed forces as well in the new year. Mr. President, the month of November, we celebrated International Men's Month. a number of activities were planned. But I want to highlight one particular initiative, which is the Men Can Cook initiative. It was the brainchild of Mr. Mario Philip, a summer intern. He came to us as a summer intern, but because of COVID, he was unable to go back out. So that's another thing that COVID has done for us. And we applaud his efforts because he's an excellent worker. And so he organized that initiative, Men Can Cook, and we had 5 men who participated in this very important cooking initiative over a 4-week period. I want to commend all those who participated. But at the end of the day, there was one winner. No, during the training, we had different challenges. So 1 week might have been a challenge on how to prepare chicken, how to prepare something else. Our Minister, Eric Evelyn, took part in that initiative, and I believe he won one of the challenges. No, I think it was how to prepare oxtail. So, from not being able to cook anything, Mr. Evelyn is now able to cook oxtail. Maybe that might be on the agenda or on the menu for Christmas. And so I want to commend the men who took part in that initiative, and I want to congratulate Mr. Ned Listrad for winning the overall Men Can Cook initiative. It is something we want to replicate, because we would have gotten a lot of great reviews and a number of persons would have sought to apply. We actually had 16 applicants, but because of this small environment, we were only able to do 5 as a first tranche. But we are saying to those persons who would have applied that we will have another coming shortly. But what we were hoping to accomplish is that we want to see men in a more leadership role. If men are to eat healthy, it means then that the whole family would eat healthy. If men are to be in the kitchen more, it means that it would foster a closer relationship with the children. They would have conversation, they would be able to talk to each other and things like that. And so I am happy that we would have had that initiative, because we want men to really take the lead role in these things. And so I must commend gender for that initiative and commend the men who stepped up and took part in that training process as well. As we move forward in terms of building some capacity, we want to add that when the Special Victims Unit is up and running, that there will be training available for those persons who are interested and who want to work, well, the law enforcement persons who are interested to work in that area and who are very passionate about helping us to deal with this hidden pandemic of abuse. It is creeping into our society, and we ought not to encourage it. We ought not to allow it to take root. And I am saying to all of us that we ought to break the silence about gender-based violence, about gender abuse. If we see something, say something. We ought not to tolerate it anymore. Mr. President, the ministry will in 2021 reaffirm and strengthen its commitment to gender equality and adopt policies and programs and projects which will address the socio-economic issues that were exacerbated by the COVID-19. We will continue to collaborate with international organizations for the much-needed resources to push forward our programs and policies. Mr. President, I want to, at this point, congratulate, and all these are in matters pertaining to 2020. I would like to congratulate young Miss Ricalia Hanley and Ms. Tamara Davis. They were the recipients of the 2020 MUA scholarship. I am told that young Miss Hanley, and she's the daughter of the late Stephen Hanley, will be pursuing a course in biomedical engineering at the University of the West Indies. And young Miss Davis will be studying psychology with a minor in counseling, also at the University of the West Indies. And so I want to encourage them and I want to wish them well to remain focused during their tenure of studies. I take this opportunity to encourage our young people to apply for this scholarship. It is a full scholarship and it is given every year. Persons are to apply around April in any given year. They will have to go through an application process and an interview process. The only thing that is required is that they must have acceptance from a reputable institution, four-year institution, prior to their application. So that is the only requirement, and so I am saying to the young people, kindly apply for this scholarship. I want to congratulate as well, Mr. President, Ms. Latoya Jeffers, who joined the ministry on November 1st as the Assistant Secretary. Ms. Jeffers brings with her a strong background in science and management. Management, as she would have managed the largest primary school on the island over the past 5 years. And she did an excellent job. Minister Brand actually cried when Ms. Jeffers was leaving the Charlestown Primary School, but I'm happy that you considered her to me. I would like to wish her well and look forward to her contribution as we seek to rebrand our health care in Nevis. Thank you, Mr. I forgot she had a brief stint at the Ministry of Education as well. So, and I'm now being told that Minister Liebert cried as well. So it has to be that she is indeed a really good person, and I'm happy to have her. I'm really happy to have her. While I'm in the process of congratulating persons, Mr. President, I would like to congratulate a number of persons who have given yeoman service in the health fraternity in Nevis. And I want to place on record my own appreciation, the administration's appreciation, and the people of Nevis' appreciation to those persons for their sterling contributions over the years. They gave of their time, they gave of their dedication, they gave of everything to make our health sector what it is. And so I want to say our health sector is better because of them. Alexandra Hospital is better because of them. And so, Mr. President, I want to call these persons. Nurse Carlotta St. Clair, 19 years. Errol Somersall, EMT, 26 years. Mavis Maynard, Senior Stores Clerk, 26 years. Eddie Richards, groundsman, 17 years. Eldina Farrell, she retired and then she came back to the health promotion unit as the HIV specialist, and the years are off the chain. Nurse Diane Morton, 39 years. Carolyn Saunders, nursing assistant, 29 years. And I want to say as well a heartfelt thank you to Matron Aldris Pemberton Diaz, who is on pre-retirement leave after 41 years of dedicated service to Alexandra and to our healthcare service, to our healthcare system. I want to congratulate all of them on their illustrious careers, and I want to wish them well. I salute them, the administration salutes them, and the entire Nevis public salutes them for their work that they would have done. Mr. President, I turn now to the solid waste management. This is a parastatal that comes under the ambit of the Ministry of Health. During the year under review, we were faced with the same challenges: illegal and indiscriminate dumping, space at the landfill that is running out, and we are in the process, Mr. President, of looking for additional space for a landfill. We are aware that the present landfill had a life of 15 years, and we have surpassed that 15 years. However, last year we were able to use another 3 acres of land, which was cleaned up with derelict vehicles from that program we had, I can't remember the name, but the scrap metal program. And so we were able to have an additional 3 acres of land at our disposal. However, we are in the process of looking for extra lands, because the 3 acres is not adequate. It will soon be overrun, and so we are indeed looking for new space for the landfill. We continue to urge persons to take their garbage, their waste to the landfill. The fees, the tipping fees, are not prohibitive, and so I don't understand why persons want to be dumping garbage in our waterways and all over the island when they could simply take them to the landfill and pay a minimal amount and have them disposed of properly. We still have our persons on high alert, and if persons are being caught dumping indiscriminately, they will be charged accordingly. In the new year, the solid waste management will invest in some heavy equipment, because they feel that there's need for more up-to-date equipment so as to make the workers' lives there easier and to be able to sort of do more if they have the adequate equipment. And so we are saying no more dumping indiscriminately. And I want to place on record how thankful we are to the management and staff of the solid waste. They have taken their jobs very seriously. They have the thrust for keeping Nevis clean, and they are very passionate about keeping Nevis clean. And so I want to thank them, thank all the workers for their hard work through their manager. I wanted to let them know that we do appreciate what you are doing in terms of keeping Nevis clean. Mr. President, for us to have accomplished all this during the course of the year, we would have had some partners over the years who have been very good to us. And so the Ministry of Health and Gender Affairs benefited from a number of generous donations as a direct result of our country's diplomatic ties. I want to say kudos to the Premier and Minister of Foreign Affairs as he continues to blaze the trail on the diplomacy matters for our country. And due to these long-lasting relationships, we continue to benefit from the generosity of these allies over the years. And so I want to, from this rostrum, thank the government of China, Taiwan, the government of India, the Canadian government, and other partners, PAHO, CAFA, St. Kitts and Nevis Social Security Board for the new ambulance and other things, pocket PCR machines and ventilators and PPEs from the government of China, Taiwan, oxygen concentrators and thermometers from the good people at Kuri's, medication from the government of India, masks. I want to say thank you to the MUA for a large donation of masks, some 10,000 masks. 100,000, I stand corrected, 100,000 masks was donated to us from the Medical University of the Americas, and monetary donation from the Bank of Nevis. I want to join with the people of Nevis in thanking these stakeholders for their partnership over the years, and especially in this very difficult time, for them to continue to stand with us and to walk with us through this very difficult time. Mr. President, I'm winding down, Mr. President, but I cannot end without saying what to expect in 2021. I know that 2021 will continue to be a very challenging year. But, and even though we look to it with some apprehension, we look to it with some degree of faith as well. And so I want to say that provided that funding is available, this is what we hope to see from the Ministry of Health and Gender Affairs in the new year. We seek to attract specialist doctors, as I said before, and an anesthesiologist and an internist. We are also encouraging our young doctors to start thinking about going back out and specializing. They are there, and they know what the priority areas are, and so we have been encouraging them. It's not for the want of encouragement, let me say. It is not for the want of encouragement. We have been encouraging them to go back out and specialize in, get themselves specialized in a particular area. So we are encouraging them while we seek to attract persons to fill this void. We endeavor to start the process for a new Charlestown Health Center. We endeavor to start the process for a Charlestown Health Center. And in year one, we are looking at consultation with the people, drawing the plans, engaging the engineers. And so we have budgeted an amount to take care of that in the first year. The mistake that some persons make when they look at the budget, if they see building Charlestown Health Center, they think it's going to be done in 1 year. It's a phased approach, and so for the first year, we will be doing consultation with the engineers, with the people who use this facility, and we'll have the plans done. That is in year one. We'll continue to seek funding and to collaborate with any funding agencies for a state-of-the-art polyclinic in Gingerland. The proposal was done this year, and so we go to the next step to try and see if we can find funding for that facility. As I said, it is a phased approach. 1 year we do one thing, and then the second year until we get it done. We don't have unlimited financing, and so, like anything else, even in your own homes, you have to budget. You buy one thing this year, buy a second thing next year. We cannot buy everything in 1 year. We continue to do on-the-job training, and we are looking at a new initiative as a part of the rebranding of health service and service at Alexandra to have persons come in from visiting hospitals to look at our nurses and our health professionals at work, and then we will organize a revisit of some of our workers to those facilities so they get an idea, get a feel of what it's like to work in a large institution, a busy institution. And all this is being put in place so that when the part is done, when the new facility is done, our people are ready to give the top-notch service that we expect of them. Mr. President, in the first quarter of next year, we are hoping to make the first or the initial down payment on the CT scan. We have enough resources in hand to make the first down payment, Mr. President. And within the first quarter of next year, we will be making the first payment of the CT scan. I want to appeal to persons as well that if you are so inclined, there is an account at the St. Kitts, Nevis and Anguilla National Bank, number 2111831. 2111831. If you are so inclined, feel free to make a contribution to the account. what we have to understand, Mr. President, is that Alexandra is for all of us. Whether you are in government or you are in opposition, at some point we will all have to go to Alexandra. And so making a contribution, whether you support this government or not, is a personal decision, because at some point we all will have to reach up at Alexandra. Okay? For next year, we will continue to do boot camps to get persons ready, prepared for owning their own businesses. We are looking at 1 per quarter, so that by the end of the year, we would have had 4 boot camps, and we would have at least trained 100 persons to venture into their own businesses. We're looking forward to that as well. 6 skills training for at-risk persons. We have to train our at-risk persons, Mr. President. Situations are what they are, and sometimes our young girls, our young boys, I don't want to say fall through the cracks, but they lag behind the ordinary or the general stream of persons. And so we have to devise plans to bring them back into mainstream. And so we are in consultation with an institution that will do some skills training for our at-risk boys and girls. And so we would want to encourage them to stay abreast of what is happening, talk with us as they usually do, come in, call, to find out what we have in store for them. And we continue our sensitization program as we would put murals around the island as it speaks to gender-based violence. We are trying to equip our persons with the basic rudiments of mental health issues. And so in the new year as well, we want to have some sensitization programs geared towards teachers, faith-based persons, so that they can identify mental issues. When persons start to act differently, they can pick up the signs and then report these cases to the mental health unit so that they can do an early intervention before these situations escalate into wider mental issues. So we will have a training in the new year for that. Mr. President, the project at Alexandra continues next year. The main building at the back, and then we have some remedial work to be done on the main kitchen. So far, I have been told that the exterior walls on the new building, it's 100% completed. 40% of the roof is also completed. The other 6% will be completed by February 20. Other 60%, sorry, will be completed by February 2021. At this critical stage, Mr. President, I want to say that we are guided by capable professionals from PAHO, from PMI gases, from the radiology experts at Philips Equipment. And I want to say that because the building of a hospital is a technical building. We're not building an ordinary house. And so we have to get it right, and we are ensuring that we get it right. We want to have a facility at the end of the day that we all could be proud of. We want to have a facility that our professionals feel comfortable working at. And as I said before, we will be doing an exchange of professionals. And so if we send our professionals overseas to work in a high-end hospital, when they come back, they must be comfortable that we have one that can rival where they would have had their training. Most importantly, Mr. President, we want to be able to have utility of this very important facility for the next 50, 60 years. So we cannot rush. We cannot rush this building. 2021 is the critical year for us to ensure that we have everything in order. And Madam Member opposite. I hear you about what is and what isn't and what has not been happening, but we can have a conversation because I can bring you up to speed. But for your edification at this point, these are the units that you can find in the new edifice: a laboratory, a pharmacy, radiology, a physiotherapy unit, a dialysis unit, and let me say it again, a dialysis unit, 2 theater suites, pediatric ward and pediatric isolation, private wards, conference room facilities, and a large lounge area for doctors and nurses. Right? What we are doing at this point is to reconfigure the space on the inside. What we have been told by the specialists is that we have too much space. We have a whole lot of space. So for greatest utility, we want to reorganize what we have on the inside so that we can even bring in more wards. We can probably even have space for the surgical ward as well. And that is where we are, right? And I take your concerns, but as I said before, it is a technical building that is being built, and so we have to get it right. The air-conditioned persons from PAHO, they have said to us that in new buildings, we have to ensure that we don't have air going the wrong way, or it leads to cross-contamination. And these are the technical issues that we are working on at this time. And so I want to, for you, and I want to put that out there as well for those persons who want to know what is happening. This is what is happening at this time. And so, Mr. President, I want to, in conclusion, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for giving me the time to speak on the bill at this time. And in closing, I want to take time out to thank my permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health and Gender Affairs, to thank all the heads of department, all established workers, non-established workers, ancillary workers, all those who would have worked alongside me during this difficult and trying year. It was indeed difficult, but I value their hard work, their commitment, their dedication. Without their willingness to perform, we could not have dealt with this COVID pandemic the way we have. And I think the people of Nevis are in a better place to know that they have dedicated professionals in the Ministry of Health like what we have working with us. They are working hard, they are keeping our borders safe, they are keeping the inside safe. And I want to also place on record, we can never ever thank them enough. Dr. Judy and her team at the center, the EOC, dealing with all the pertinent information. Now that our borders have been reopened, the onus is on them even more to ensure that we keep ourselves free, to lessen the numbers, and to keep ourselves free from COVID-19. And so, on behalf and the behalf of the administration, I would like to thank my technical people, and they're all here. Thank you very much for your support throughout this year, which was indeed a very trying year. And so, I would want to wish this bill a safe passage through this honorable House. May it please you, Mr. President.
Lunch. Yeah.
Mr. President, I rise and seek your leave for the adjournment of this honorable House until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Mr. President, I rise to second that motion.
Question is that this House be adjourned until 3 p.m. this afternoon. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House adjourned.